Welcome to the NextGen GTM podcast. In this series, we talk with experts to uncover the next GTM tools and techniques driving measurable results for themselves and their clients. My name is Mike Bell, co-founder and CTO at Scheduler AI. My guest today is Eric Engoran, the head of integrations for Clay. He's been there since 2022, seen the rise, helped build the first 70 plus integrations. Eric, we've tried to make this happen like no less than 6 or 7 times, man. It's been crazy.
Yes, I'm glad I can finally be here and we finally made this work for sure. I didn't know if it was ever going to happen. So
I didn't either. I mean, I'm thinking back, you and I were chatting about it a little bit before. It's like the first one, it was like a Friday, like maybe back in like December. And you were like, dude, I'm so sorry. All of Clay went down. I have to fix it. Right. And then you like fix that. And then we rescheduled, and I think one of our kids got strap. And then last week, what was it, like a hole in your seal? I mean,
yeah, some crazy stuff, but glad we finally, made it work. Everything's going well with Clay, so we don't have to worry about it. Everything's good.
that's awesome, man. Dude, you had such a ride. I mean, the last time we were like on the phone, so like we got to know each other over COVID, right? We were in that like Discord group for people in SaaS. Very weird, but
Very weird, but it was fun. We got to know each other, so it was good.
we got to know each other. And I remember you calling me. You were at kind of like a tough point because you were like, hey, like I'm looking for my next kind of career. I love to build integrations, right? I remember you like telling me on the phone, you're like, my passion is like connecting things. So like I think one, we were joking about it a little bit before, but every programmer knows it's like, you owe your career to that one Indian guy who put all the YouTube videos up there for you to learn. And you, I really truly believe are that like for RevOps people, that unsung hero that they don't know how many integrations you've built that they have probably put their stack on top of. Can you just like talk a little bit about like, hey, if you've used close stuff in Zapier, that was me. If that was like, can you just talk about some of the integrations you've built?
So I built obviously the close integration with Zapier is probably the biggest integration I built just from size, because at one point we were crashing Zapier every time we deployed that close integration. Because so back before Zapier released their CLI, you would have to do web-based deploys, and closes Zapier integration at the time was about 70 triggers, actions, and searches, and it was just so large that it would actually like it would break the deployment system because it was so large, and we would just have to wait for things to go through. And eventually we switched their CLI, which was like a huge migration. We were able to get that done. But that's kind of a funny story, that integration was so large that it kind of broke Zapier, in the early stages. But in addition to that, after close, most of my integration work has been at Clay. I built kind of the first 70 or so integrations that you see in the platform. And now we have a team of amazing engineers that builds those as well, that I help out with. So
what was the first integration you built at Clay? Do you remember?
The first integration I built at Clay, it was definitely, actually, the first thing I did at Clay was fix the closed CRM integration because it was near and dear to my heart, and I saw a bug in it, so I was like, I have to fix that one first, to be honest. But then after that, I think I really focused on CRMs. So I fixed like the Salesforce integration. I fixed the HubSpot integration. Or not fixed, but I built them, in our V2 platform. Because when I first started at Clay, we were sunsetting an earlier version of the product. And part of that sunset was to move all of our integrations over to a newer system.
That makes a ton of sense. Now, you said you started with the CRMs. How did you guys decide, like, we're going to prioritize? Because there's no end of integrations, right? So how did you guys decide we're going to do this one, then this one, etc.?
So that's a great question. The main way that I prioritize in the early stages, and I think Varun may have a different answer to this question, but the way that I prioritize is I was like, what would be fun to build right now? And I would just build it. So that was the first metric that I used internally of like, I'm trying to build, 50 plus integrations. What do I want to work on first? But then the second way that we prioritize, which was the more important way and the actual business answer to this question, is we would hop on calls with customers, and instead of us driving the demo of Clay, we let the customers drive the demo of Clay. And then anything we saw that like they needed, or they didn't really understand how it worked or couldn't figure out how to get the data into Clay, that's kind of what we would build.
So you guys did like a reverse demo? You would just like give them access, open it, and watch them?
Yep. That's exactly what it is. And Varun and I Varun, the co-founder of Clay, would literally hop on these calls with people and just watch them use Clay and then fix whatever we saw or whatever they requested.
Man, that's great.
Did that for about a year, maybe more.
Really, until it just became so intuitive
Yeah.
for other people to use. You know, as a Clay user, I'm curious too, when you guys started to bring in, OpenAI to do like almost like the enrichment you want described, so was that kind of a pivotal point in usability as well?
Yes. So I think we went through kind of a few different phases with AI for sure. Like the first thing that I remember doing with AI was just their generate prompt action, like way before ChatGPT existed. We got GPT-3 into Clay, and all that was just a normal integration with their API. But then as things started progressing, we then had a really like prototype version of ChatGPT where it was like you could say how many prompts you were going to enter, and then like it would load the text boxes to enter those prompts, and then you could, start a chat. And then now obviously we have like a team of people that literally work on AI as their main focus. So like part of integrations that was super interesting for me is I'm actually prototyping other features that the team is eventually going to take over and build as well.
Sick. Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. You guys, it's gone from this where you just had to build everything to having this team. And, I think along the way, right, like you have to deal with some like additional, challenges that other people don't have to deal with, right? So, are you comfortable talking about just some of the physical challenges you've had to overcome?
For sure. So I'm a wheelchair user. I have cerebral palsy, and it's it's been very interesting, especially working at Clay too, and kind of balancing, you know, those things that I have to deal with in everyday life, and a startup that's literally been a rocket ship and is growing like crazy. So one example of that is in March of 2023. So about a year after I started at Clay, I broke my hand, and funny enough, I had to go to I live in Arizona, and I had to go to UCLA to get my hand looked at because the emergency room I went to in Arizona was like, we don't know what's part of this injury and what's part of your disability, so we don't feel comfortable like doing anything. So I went all the way to UCLA. Now I
Wow.
come back and I literally am building integrations one-handed with a cast on my hand because I couldn't type with my other hand. So I think that's kind of one thing that's interesting is like I will always find a way to do something, even if it means typing one-handed. And that's kind of how I approach integrations too. It's like anything you want to connect is somehow possible to connect. You just have to figure out how. So I think, there are mobility challenges. There's more doctor's appointments. There's more things that I have to deal with on a daily basis. Just now, when we were recording this podcast, you mentioned that I was kind of drifting to the right, or my camera was drifting, but I was the one actually drifting because I'm in a wheelchair and my house is slanted. So, like, random things that nobody ever thinks of, I just kind of have to deal with. But the way that I approach it is like my life is figuring out how to adapt to different things. And I think I bring that into my professional experience as well, because it's like anything is possible to do. You just have to figure out how to do it.
Dude, that's so. I freaking love you for that. I already even just remember, yeah, again, you were in that kind of, I think we were both trying to figure out things right during that COVID season. We were on that phone call, and you were like, I'm gonna figure it out.
Yeah.
You just knew you weren't sure what it was gonna be yet, right? And I mean, landing at Clay, where it's again, you were like, my passion is building integrations, and then there you are at like the premier integration building company. I guess it would be kind of interesting to talk a little bit about like the rocket ship inflection, right? Like, when did you guys kind of I remember reading the press release, I think, for the Series B, and the investors basically saying, hey, like this was one of those that was like a slow burn until it wasn't, right? It was like steady, 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 that hockey stick that everybody always hopes for in a startup journey. What was kind of that point for you guys?
I mean, I think that point was really, I think it's a couple things, to be honest. I think one, it was the speed which we built integrations. So so in the early days, we would literally hop on calls, like Varun and I would hop on calls with customers. There would be times where I would build integrations while we were still on the call that happened once or twice, and I was like, that's awesome. So that's when I knew that this was, a special place engineering wise. But then in addition to that, I think the way we approach marketing was really the pivotal point for Clay. Now, I am not a marketer, so I can't speak to it as thoughtfully as maybe a marketer would, but I think the way that our marketing team has been able to generate brand and community has been absolutely incredible. And it's like, completely organic, and people want to be a part of the community. And our experts program and our partner program is up there as well. So I really think that most of that inflection point is when we really started realizing the community that
Were you a part of like that early community in there? Like I'm in the Slack community, right? Like, I mean, people are, to your point, they're super helpful in there. Were you kind of in that early community, or did they shield you from it? What was that like?
No, so in the early days of Clay, we didn't have a support team. Our support team was literally Kareem Varun and I responding in that Slack community. That was support. There was no, help button in our app. There was no like, support chat. There was nothing like that. It was literally post in the Slack channel and I will help you solve this bug. And from those early days, like I would build integrations as part of support tickets back then too. So I think that was, the early days of support are really what kind of showed me in the beginning that this was a community that could like make something big happen.
What was the most difficult request support ticket that you can remember having to deal with?
Ooh, it's a good question. Most difficult support ticket. I have to think about that one. Let me think about that. Let me come back to that question because I
All
want to
right.
give you like a real answer to that question.
That's fair enough. Well, kind of maybe even tangential then. What have been some of the most challenging integrations you've had to write? What actually I would love to know, like, what are some of the ones that were like the easiest to build, like very clear documentation, very good, very straightforward, versus what are some been just the absolute buggers to build?
So I would actually phrase that question a little bit differently. I don't
Okay.
necessarily think any integration is that hard to build. What I think my answer to that question is what do the docs not tell you? So
Mm.
for example, there are a lot of companies that have, you know, they have documentation that says we're gonna, do proper error codes, we're gonna do everything like that. Then you start using their app and you realize that their error codes are actually 200 responses with an error array inside of that 200 success response. And then, like, so it's not just looking for error codes and returning the proper error. You also have to figure out how to, like, manipulate the data that they send you back. Or, like, occasionally you'd be expecting, a 401 and they, like, unauthorized, and they send you,
Right.
like, a 500 with unauthorized inside of it. So when you're trying to return proper error messages to the user, it can, like, you also have to be able to know how to reproduce every single one of those cases. Or with a lot of credit-based systems, for instance, it's like, how do you reproduce the fact that someone is out of credits to know what to display when you're testing the integration? You have to go back to the provider and say, hey, can you also provision me a key with no credits so that I can test what the response is going to be? So I think
Wow.
just overall integration testing is the hardest part. And as you move up to, enterprise kind of stuff, like say you're doing Salesforce, right? You don't have a lot of data in your sandbox that a traditional Salesforce user would have. You don't have the built out custom objects. You don't have, a lot of those relationships that you may have between objects. So how do you make sure the Salesforce integration works is, just a pivotal question in all of engineering. And for me, that answer has been really treat the customer as a design partner. Like if a customer finds a bug, you have to let them know, like, hey, can I like use your, like, I won't touch anything in your account, but like, can I take a look and try to fix this? Because you have the data I need to actually fix it, right? And you have to work with the customer to figure that out.
We have definitely experienced that as well, and I think Salesforce is definitely the one that comes to mind for me the most, right? Even when you're like authing across, and you always have to have like two sandboxes sometimes, even to get things to talk.
Right. And there are sometimes too with CRMs like, Salesforce is up to version like 60 something of their API, right? And maybe in version 42 they returned a field that they no longer do that some people were depending on. And that happened with HubSpot too, where in previous versions of their API, they used to return a label, like a label display name, but now they return the label or the choice ID instead of the label in the response. So people are like, what do I do with this ID? And then you have to make an additional API call to get the, pipeline so that you could return the proper label or something like that. So like all of those things when it comes to version changes, updates to APIs are things that Clay needs to, focus on and worry about.
That's really interesting. Yeah. I think, the amount of complexity you guys abstract away from the user, right? When it's done really well, it's almost like oh, I could go build that. Right. But as you go like deeper and deeper into it, you're like, oh my gosh, like just the tangled web that you guys have had to weave to make it feel so simple. I mean, that's a huge engineering feat right there.
I mean, when you're building integrations, and especially when because the vision of Clay is to make, like, to me, what makes Clay special is like the approach we take is we're gonna try not to limit you when it comes to integration, so you can be as creative as possible, right? But but at this, like, not limiting someone, in a traditional sense would essentially be return every field of the API response so you could do whatever you want, right? But there's this interesting like scale between like make the data usable and allow people to do whatever they want. And what I mean by that is like, for example, with closed CRM, perfect example, when you have a custom field in closed CRM, it's going to return the ID in the JSON response, not the name. So if people are viewing that in Clay, they're going to be like, what is CF underscore 76245Z6? Like people don't know what that label is. So even though it seems like we're just returning API responses so you could do whatever you want with them, there's also a level of how do we make the data usable and what middleware do we need to get that done. And that brings up its own host of engineering challenges too, where it's like on every single request, we don't want to load the custom field labels again. So where do we cache them? How long do we cache them for? Do we allow a refresh? Like what triggers that refresh, etc. So it's a very interesting, and integrations in general are definitely very interesting engineering problems.
Speaking of like engineer, so just from a nerdy side now, I'm curious because I think we've chatted about this. Are you guys still building on the same, like I don't even know your backend? Are you guys using like a traditional framework for your backend, like a Flask or Django or TypeScript?
So we're a TypeScript shop for the most part.
TypeScript. And so has the platform you started with been able to scale, or have you had to re-platform along the way?
I mean, the platform we started with has been able to scale, but there are definitely scaling challenges. Like, for example, the more AI tools that we integrate with Clay, the more we need like async operations, because it's not just like synchronous API calls that return responses. It's like AI may take 20 minutes to generate a video, and we need to not have a connection open for 20 minutes, but we also need to be able to get the data when it's. So we've been able to scale, but we've also had to adapt to longer running processes than just traditional integration.
That's fascinating. I hadn't considered that point, right? Because you're kind of typically generating almost like left to right, in say like a given row. And so to your point, yeah, if you have something that's that long running, you can't just have a port that's open.
I mean, you could, but you would be charged like crazy.
Yeah, okay, yeah, sorry, yeah. You
Right.
don't want to have like some open socket that's just sitting there
Right.
holding traffic up.
For like 20 to 40 minutes. And then if you multiply that by like 50K rows in a Clay table, you could be looking at actual days of, things being open. So that's been a very interesting technical shift that we've had.
Were you guys always credits based too, as we're talking about this? Or did that kind of come up later?
I mean, it was very early on in Clay. Like when we first started, allowing people to use the platform, we didn't even have the concept of billing. Like when I first started, Varun was doing billing via a Google Sheet. And we just, kind of ran that way. But it was very early on when we implemented, self-serve billing that we introduced credit.
Did you do the billing as well? All the integration stuff?
I was on the team that did the billing. Me and Mark, another engineer, built the billing system.
That's
And I
crazy.
worked on billing at close as well. So it's kind of, if you think of billing, it really is just one giant integration with Stripe. So like it fits with the whole integration, moniker.
That's pretty cool. I mean, kind of like last sort of question here. I'm curious how you guys see Clay. So, there's a lot of tools like, you've got the Zapiers of the world, right? They're bringing out tables and stuff. You've got Lindy that's pushing into this space, right? Yeah, I think you have a lot of people who are pushing into this at different angles. Is there a reason that you think that Clay is just going to continue to kind of stay on top in this space?
Yes. So I think a few things differentiate Clay quite a bit. I think the first one is, as I said before, the team and community that we have is absolutely crazy. Like it's amazing. And so that's one thing, but I also think that the approach that we take to building features in Clay is the other side of things that really differentiates us, right? Like the getting on calls with customers and watching them drive and figuring out what they need, like that reverse demo is still a part of our, DNA, right? So I think the way that we approach building is really what sets us apart.
I love that.
And
Super.
I do think that there are, obviously you mentioned Zapier tables, some others, and there are going to be people that build tables, but I do think that their use cases are somewhat different in the sense that like we really want to scale, in a way it's like scaling your creativity with outbound, right? So it's not just scale in terms of like you can do a bunch of actions in a table and it runs. It's more like, how do we let that be creative? And I think that's the approach we take. We take that in our approach with, our merchandise as well. Like I'm wearing a grow hat that's actually from Clay. You won't
Really?
know it in the beginning, but on the back there's like a Clay logo on this hat. And I think, you know, just having the word grow is like that's a really awesome hat, but when you dig into it more it's like, hey, that's actually Clay branded. Like that's pretty cool too. So things like that, just that differentiate us quite a bit from the rest of the field.
That's really neat. I mean, yeah, that like the whole culture eat strategy for breakfast, kind of like bringing the best people on, seeing the vision. You mentioned outbound, but like, honestly, because we work with mostly people who are running inbound, right? You guys have become popular there as well. Folks come in, do the enrichment, and then kind of like routing even off of that. I feel like, it's really neat. You've got the outbound and the inbound makes it a very powerful combination.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Outbound was just the example that I gave there, but I think we can handle it all as long as you want to be creative. That's what I really love about Clay.
I think are there use cases of Clay? So like I mean, anybody listening to this, right, it's going to be more on the sales and marketing side for
Sure.
the most part. So, like generating personalized outbound at scale, doing inbound enrichment and lead scoring. But are there any other like use cases you've seen that maybe even surprised you? Like I never thought about that.
I mean, I've literally seen someone like plan date ideas with Clay. So it's like literally using our Google Maps integration, getting reviews for different businesses, trying to filter them out with AI using, semantics to figure out what they actually wanted to do on that date. And like so it's things like that surprise me. Where it's like people can literally use this data to do anything. I remember using it. So I live in Arizona and we have a lot of HVAC problems because it's so hot in the summer. I used it to find, the best reviewed HVAC person near me that I could call and like figure out when to set up an appointment. Right? So like there's so many different even one-off use cases that you could use it for. Is like those are what interests me. Like what are the creative ways that you could do that? And I mean like you could even theoretically like make dynamic web pages using AI and send them to prospective customers. Right? So like those are the things that I think are pretty cool.
That's a really sweet idea. I love that. The dynamic, but like where to your point, you could have probably, yeah, just something like base, but like snag their logo, snag their brand colors, throw in a few different things, and yeah, now you have something very personalized.
Right, or like use our company people's jobs data, get more information about like their social bio, work that into the website, you know, hook it up to our Google Docs integration and write like a research report for your sales team without them ever having to do anything. Like so many different options.
And the cool thing I know that you guys do as well, right, is you take the most interesting use cases or the most common use cases, right, and then templatize them so that, like, I mean, that's a play we're taking from you guys for sure, right? For our own side of things, if you want to set up a homepage web chat, for instance, in Scheduler, how do you give us a little bit of information, right? And we go and craft it for you so you don't have to think about all the nuances and the, kind of like best in class ways to do it.
Right, for sure. Like one of the things too that I think I saw that was really amazing is that there are people that are actually using Clay for things like I'm trying to think of the best example of that I've seen. There was one person I saw that was literally using Clay and like worked with formulas even in because formulas in Clay are super powerful as well. We basically have a stripped down version of JavaScript that we call ClayScript that can, do certain things. And one of the things that I saw someone do is like they wrote a single line JavaScript formula to like rate competitors that they got from Google on specific businesses. And it was like they literally had to figure out a one line version because we don't allow for like, we don't allow for like multi-code lines in our formulas yet, but just having like a single line version that would like go through the loop, like compare all the competitors, return the best match. And I was just like, this is peak like creative meets developer meets marketer. You know what I mean? And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, you guys, like, when you think about, like, I mean, obviously, you have an ecosystem that's evolved around you. Claygencies, right? That's wild, right? And then, like, the whole term GTM engineer has even come out of that, right? I mean, this has been a fundamental shift. I mean, what a crazy company to be part of. To have a fundamental shift in the market occurring from around what you guys have been able to build. I mean, it's a wild story.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about our team is that everyone is kind of solutions and technically minded. And what I mean by that is like even our support team is like an expert in Salesforce at this point, just because of like the questions they've had to field. And I think one of the difficult parts about, Clay in general is that because we really are a platform that's powered by integrations, is you almost have to be like the first line of defense in a lot of integrations questions. So you inherently have to be technically minded in support. You have to be willing to solve those problems, figure out those problems, So I think the hard part about Clay, but also the amazing part is like finding people that not only understand like what someone is trying to accomplish in like a sales flow, but also knowing how to debug it when something goes wrong, when like, some larger enterprises may have 25 integrations with Salesforce that all interplay with each other in some different way. So like maybe it is, an issue with Clay, but maybe it's this other tool that's impacting how Clay is functioning. And you kind of have to solve that puzzle. And everyone on the team would be willing to solve that puzzle. And I think that's pretty cool.
That's not just like a, hey, that's your problem, but it's like it's an us thing to figure out.
Right. Or at least even if we know it is their problem, we can at least guide them to, here's what I would do. Or I don't have enough visibility to see into this, issue you're having, but here's what I would check for, things like that.
That's awesome. I asked you a question at the beginning about this, about the hairiest, thorniest support request thing you've been through. So I don't know if you've thought of one. If not, we don't have to.
Yeah, so I did think about it. I think the most interesting one I've been through is, so there was a day where some CRM, I don't remember which one it was, but the CRM, the way that they loaded their fields went down. And as I mentioned before, we have in Clay the ability to, when something returns an ID, return that label. so that people can actually use it. That endpoint went down for the entire CRM. So I actually had to figure out, like, how do we still load that data? Because the other thing that was occurring then is, since Clay's based around formulas, since that object no longer existed in the JSON because we couldn't transform the IDs, it broke a bunch of tables. So what I ended up doing was, actually, I found a workaround that their, like, post lead endpoint was able to return the labels if you added a certain field. So I would create leads, get that label mapping, and then delete the lead before anyone noticed. But then that created a bunch of rate limiting issues because
Yeah.
you were doing 3 requests instead of 1. So it was quite it was
That's, I know we were running into one. It's so funny you bring about that, the rate limiting. We had an issue actually with the closed APIs at one point where it was a race condition on creating versus updating a contact between ours and another integration running in a table. And you're right. So we basically had to go in, check, create, check again, delete. Yeah, and it was just madness.
yeah. And I think, rate limiting in general is such a difficult part of SaaS, especially when you consider that, like, say I wanted to integrate with Bullhorn CRM, right? They have some weird mixture of, like, JWT tokens and OAuth, where it's like you have to OAuth to get a JWT token that's live for an hour and then it resets. They call it, like, an API session token. Now, Clay doesn't have a Bullhorn integration yet because no one's requested it, but when they do, I already know that I'm going to have to build a new type of custom auth because I've worked on Bullhorn in the past for a few other integrations that I've built.
Do you guys think you have enough pull these days, though, to say things like, hey, if you want to be available in Clay, you need to be able to create like a long-lived token? Like, has it gone from this, like, where you've had to work inside of things to where you can actually go to these teams and say, hey, your customers want this to do more work with you. We need you to do XYZ. Have you started to have that kind of brand gravity?
A little bit. Now I will say that we're pretty reasonable with our requests, but with a lot of generative AI tools, for instance, like, we ask them to implement async callbacks, which is what we call, like, the long running thing to generate the content that you and I were talking about previously. Like, we ask them to send us the data when it's done versus us having to pull an API in, right? So that's one thing we ask for. But one thing you reminded me of that I think is a very interesting story is that, so when I first started at Clay and Varun and I were hopping on these calls, I didn't care about partnerships teams when building integrations. Like, obviously I loved partnerships team, but I was like, I'm not going through traditional work streams to go and build this integration. I was asking the customer, hey, do you have a key? I'll build it right now. Right? So there were a few different times in the, Clay history where we would build an integration with a customer's API key. It would be live for everyone. And then when Clay started getting some notoriety, these companies would be like, bro, we didn't sign off on this. Like, what is this integration? We have no idea. So, like, there have been a few integrations that we've had to take down, a few integrations that we've had to change over the years, but that's just the nature of growing and gaining notoriety as a business.
That's amazing. That's perfect. Eric, this has been so fun, man. It's been just so good to see you, catch up a little bit, hear some of these stories. I feel like, in a crazy way, maybe things are even still just getting started.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see the future.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you for rescheduling 76 times, and I'm glad we finally made it work.
It's part of life.